They waited for you to collapse. They built entire conversations around your supposed downfall, whispering about how you'd never recover, how the damage would define you. They wanted to see you kneel, not because they wanted your pain, but because they needed the validation of superiority. But you didn't collapse. You didn't beg for sympathy or applause. You didn't turn pain into theater. You sat with it, dissected it, and built something sharp out of it. You refused the script they wrote for you. You refused to play the victim. That decision confused them, because power isn't supposed to look that quiet. You didn't retaliate. You didn't explain. You simply continued. Every step you took without asking for pity dismantled their narrative. They weren't prepared for someone who could bleed and still walk like nothing happened. You became an anomaly in a world addicted to self-pity, and that unsettled them deeply. They called it denial at first. They said you were suppressing your emotions, pretending to be strong, masking your pain with arrogance. They said that because they couldn't comprehend transformation without collapse. But you weren't pretending. You were processing differently. You stopped identifying with what hurt you. You didn't deny pain. You refused to worship it. While they held on to wounds as proof of identity, you let yours become instruction. You learned the difference between feeling and dwelling, between remembering and reliving. That distinction made you powerful, because most people drown in the same story they refuse to stop telling. You changed the story entirely. You turned victimhood into data, pain into strategy, sorrow into silence. They couldn't decode that kind of strength because it wasn't dramatic. It was controlled. They were waiting for tears, but what they got instead was composure. And composure is a language the broken cannot speak. You learn that victimhood is seductive. It gives you an excuse to stop trying, a reason to be comforted, a shield against accountability. It tells you that your scars are a crown, even when they're chains. You saw people worshiping their pain like it gave them purpose. You wanted no part in that religion. You wanted freedom, not attention. So you stopped performing struggle and started mastering recovery. That decision alienated you, because most people confuse healing with forgetting. They wanted to see you perform your pain to feel less guilty about their own. But you refused. You learned that healing doesn't require an audience. It requires distance. They can't understand that. They think moving on means betrayal. But you didn't betray anyone. You just refused to stay small enough for their pity to fit around you. That kind of independence feels like rebellion to those who thrive on collective suffering. They tried to lure you back into the role. They sent messages wrapped in concern, conversations dripping with nostalgia, hoping to reopen old wounds. Because your strength made them uncomfortable. It reminded them of their stagnation. Victimhood loves company, and you became a threat to their membership. You no longer participated in the endless recycling of misery. You stopped talking about what broke you and started working on what built you. That shift created tension because they can't stand seeing someone escape what they still depend on for validation. They called you cold, detached, unfeeling, but that was projection. You didn't lose empathy, you gained boundaries. You stopped trying to fix what feeds on being broken. Their confusion is a symptom of their addiction, to drama, to guilt, to helplessness. You cured yourself, and recovery exposes those who prefer to stay sick. Your detachment frightened them because it meant you no longer sought approval. They can't control someone who doesn't crave comfort. The victim mentality thrives on attention. It feeds on external recognition. But you learned to feed on solitude. You stopped posting pain for applause. You stopped measuring your worth through sympathy. You stopped needing people to validate your suffering. And in doing so, you broke the entire social ritual of victimhood. That's what power looks like in its purest form. Emotional self-sufficiency. They didn't expect that from you. They thought your silence meant weakness, when in truth, it was evolution. You discovered that power doesn't shout, it sustains. They have no idea how to handle someone who doesn't need to be saved. You became their contradiction. They keep trying to define you through your past, but you already rewrote yourself in a language they no longer understand. They once pitied you. They told your story with sympathy in their voices, thinking it made them virtuous. But pity is not compassion. It's condescension dressed as care. You saw that now. You realize that pity keeps people dependent. It softens accountability and glorifies fragility. So you rejected it entirely. You stopped allowing people to feed you comfort that numbs instead of challenges. You learned that genuine compassion doesn't come from someone who enjoys being needed. It comes from someone who teaches you how to no longer need them. That's what you became for yourself. You became your own teacher, your own anchor. You pulled yourself out of victimhood not by denying help, but by outgrowing dependency. They watched you do it and couldn't recognize the process. They mistook evolution for ego. They can't grasp that freedom often looks like distance. You didn't become detached, you became sovereign. The day you stopped seeking revenge was the day you truly left the role. Revenge is still emotional debt. It still ties you to what hurt you. You realized that healing wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about making them irrelevant. When you no longer cared who saw your rise, your power became irreversible. That's when confusion turned to fear. They could no longer read your motives because your motives no longer revolved around them. You weren't rising against them. You were rising beyond them. That's what victimhood can't comprehend. That indifference is stronger than retaliation. You didn't need justice anymore because you became your own balance. They're still waiting for the day you'll lash out, confess pain, or seek closure. But that day will never come. You turned every scar into silence, and silence into peace. That's what breaks them. Your calm, your absence, your refusal to play their game. They say forgiveness is divine, but they misunderstand it. Forgiveness without awareness is surrender. You didn't forgive to comfort anyone. You forgave to cut the cord. You stopped letting resentment act as a leash connecting you to people who no longer deserve proximity. You understood that holding on to pain only keeps it alive. So you released it not with words, but with detachment. You outgrew the story. That kind of clarity doesn't require ceremony. It requires discipline. You built peace like a fortress, and now they can't enter. They don't know how to interact with someone who doesn't flinch at their absence. They think you're emotionless, but you're just free. You don't need closure from those who caused the wound. You found it in the fact that you survived. That realization isn't softness. It's control. You stopped being their emotional extension and became your own authority. You see now how much of society depends on the performance of pain. People post it, wear it, monetize it, glorify it. You stopped performing. You stopped participating in the ritual of weakness. That withdrawal made them nervous. They don't know how to relate to someone who doesn't need validation to exist. You became unpredictable. That's why they whisper. That's why they watch you with unease. Because your peace is not performative, it's earned. You refuse to carry the emotional inheritance of those who never learned resilience. You no longer entertain conversations that glorify helplessness. They call you intimidating, but that's projection. You're not intimidating. They're just unprepared for someone who found power in silence. They want you broken because broken people buy more. They sell you the cure while feeding the sickness. They market peace while breeding chaos. They profit from your doubt, from your exhaustion, from your endless need to feel fixed. They call it progress, but it's dependency. The world does not reward healing. It monetizes wounds. You learn that the moment you stopped consuming what numbed you and started sitting in silence, healing became your rebellion. You stopped reacting to every advertisement of inadequacy, every whisper that told you you're not enough. They didn't expect you to find peace without purchase. They didn't expect you to be whole without their permission. The moment you began to self-regulate, they lost control of your emotions. Because that's the secret. They don't care about happiness. They care about your hunger for it. You stopped being a consumer of comfort and became the creator of it. Healing makes you dangerous because it removes predictability. They can't sell to someone who knows themselves. They can't guilt you into performance once you stop needing approval. Every healed person is a threat to a system that thrives on low self-worth. They keep people addicted to external solutions, scrolling, spending, escaping. You stopped escaping. You started facing what they told you to avoid. You sat in discomfort until it became wisdom. They can't manipulate someone who understands their own triggers. They call you detached because detachment can't be taxed. They call you cold because composure can't be controlled. Healing strips away the illusions they invested in creating. You don't need their distractions anymore. You walk through their noise untouched. That terrifies them, because healed people don't serve systems, they dismantle them. Your peace is no longer profitable to anyone but you, and that kind of independence is revolutionary. They trained you to equate pain with identity. They convinced you that suffering made you special, that drama was depth, that chaos was meaning. You were taught to romanticize dysfunction, because calm doesn't sell. But you saw through it. You realized pain is not personality, it's programming. You started decoding the lies in every slogan, every self-help trend designed to keep you looping. You stopped chasing transformation through external validation and began building it through self-discipline. They can't stand people like you because you make peace look possible. You make strength look quiet. You make happiness look unmarketable. When you heal, you break the contract they wrote for you. The unspoken agreement that says you must stay insecure so they can stay rich. You broke it by simply choosing to feel whole. And in a world designed to keep you searching, wholeness is the most unforgivable rebellion of all. Healing demands stillness, and stillness exposes the architecture of control. The moment you stop running, you start noticing who benefits from your chaos. You see how every industry feeds off restlessness. Beauty, politics, religion, entertainment, they all require your imbalance to survive. You were never the customer, you were the resource. Every insecurity mined for profit, every heartbreak packaged as a subscription. They told you healing takes time because they hoped you'd never finish. But you did. You found out that peace costs nothing. You found out that self-respect can't be sold. They call it self-help, but it's dependency dressed in inspiration. You stopped participating. You turned your pain inward and studied it until it lost its mystery. You started healing quietly, without hashtags, without applause. That's why they hate it. It's the kind of rebellion that doesn't burn cities. It burns illusions. They confuse healing with weakness because healed people don't perform pain. You no longer need sympathy, and that steals their leverage. They thrived on your reactions. They needed your outrage to keep attention alive. But outrage keeps people predictable. Anger is marketable, awareness is not. When you healed, you stopped being predictable. You stopped arguing online, stopped defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding. That silence became their defeat. They can't control calm minds. They can't sell serenity. They built empires on your need to escape yourself, and you denied them that privilege. They call you heartless, but that's projection. You simply stopped bleeding for those who feed on wounds. That shift in energy dismantled their illusion of importance. You realized peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the absence of control. And in a world that profits from noise, your silence became the loudest act of resistance. Healing exposes dependency like light exposes rot. You began to see how many people only exist in cycles of crisis because peace would make them irrelevant. They feed on problems. Politicians need division, influencers need comparison, toxic partners need control. When you healed, you interrupted their economy. You stopped being a consumer of pain. You stopped participating in drama that feeds egos and kills awareness. You became selective with your energy, deliberate with your time, immune to manipulation. They can't handle that kind of precision because it leaves them powerless. Healing isn't polite, it's disruptive. It tears down systems disguised as support. It forces people to face the truth that chaos has been their comfort all along. You stopped being addicted to pain and started studying it. You didn't fight their power. You outgrew it. And that's why they call you dangerous. Because healed people don't revolt, they evolve. They say healing is self-love, but it's more than that. It's self-liberation. You freed yourself from their emotional economy. You no longer measure worth by productivity. You no longer crave validation disguised as opportunity. You realize that most of what you chased was bait. They wanted your exhaustion because exhaustion makes you obedient. But you learned that peace makes you independent. You no longer perform exhaustion for sympathy or burnout for credibility. You choose rest without guilt, solitude without apology, joy without justification. That freedom threatens everything built on comparison. They can't profit from someone who no longer competes. That's what scares them. You became content in a world that worships lack. You stopped seeking and started existing. You found beauty in stillness, and stillness doesn't sell. Healing turned you from consumer to creator, and creators can't be controlled. You started seeing through the language of manipulation. Every commercial that said, "You deserve this," was just another way of saying, "You are incomplete." Every influencer who preached authenticity was performing it. You realized that most people don't want healing. They want attention disguised as healing. You wanted truth. And truth is ugly before it's freeing. You stopped craving comfort and chose clarity instead. They call that coldness, but it's awareness. You stopped explaining yourself to the unhealed, stopped entertaining people who mistake trauma bonding for connection. You became selective with your peace, not out of arrogance, but precision. Because healing taught you that not everyone deserves access to calm energy. They want your empathy, but not your boundaries. You learned to give neither without discernment. That's rebellion. To know the difference and still choose peace anyway. They can't control someone who has made peace with their past. That's the hidden rule. They rely on your shame to keep you silent, your guilt to keep you small, your fear to keep you compliant. When you healed, you dismantled their leverage. You stopped defending your mistakes because they no longer defined you. You forgave yourself for what they used to weaponize. You stopped being reactive to their narratives. That emotional neutrality is power they can't decode. You no longer fit their story of you. You became the version of yourself they can't manipulate through history. Healing doesn't erase the past. It rewrites its hierarchy. You stopped letting pain be the author. That act of reclamation made you unstoppable. You no longer carry wounds as warnings. You carry them as wisdom. That difference makes you unpredictable. And in their world, unpredictable means uncontrollable. They came expecting chaos. They rehearsed arguments, crafted manipulative lines, and armed themselves with guilt. They studied your old triggers like soldiers studying enemy maps. They wanted to provoke, to push, to make you break character. Because pain is familiar. It's predictable. When you were angry, they could twist it. When you were emotional, they could dismiss it. They were ready for that version of you. The reactive one, the wounded one, the one who felt too much. But you didn't give them that. You gave them composure. You spoke softly where they expected shouting. You moved slowly where they predicted frenzy. You didn't explain. You simply observed. That terrified them. Because people can fight noise, they don't know what to do with silence. Your calm made them question their own narratives. You didn't lose control, you became control. And that reversal rewired their entire strategy. They were expecting tears, not strategy. They were ready to comfort the mess, not face the mirror. Your composure forced them to see themselves, and that is what broke them. People who feed on your emotions are addicted to control disguised as care. They can't handle calm because calm cannot be manipulated. You stopped giving them something to manage. You stopped needing to be understood. That silence they mistook for weakness was calculation. You learned that anger gives power away, but stillness draws it back. You stopped performing pain for validation. You realized the loudest person in a room is usually the most powerless. So you became quiet. You started speaking only when needed, moving only when certain. That discipline disturbed them. They can handle confrontation, but they cannot handle being irrelevant. You made them irrelevant with grace, and grace used correctly is far more dangerous than rage. They underestimated the strength it takes to remain calm. Anyone can react. Few can remain still while storms form around them. You stopped letting them script your reactions. You saw how easily chaos spreads when you match it. You understood that composure is not submission. It's strategy. It's the art of allowing someone to destroy their own argument while you stand untouched. They were prepared to fight your temper, but not your peace. You became unpredictable because they built their power on your emotional availability. You closed that gate. Now they knock with panic. They shout louder, project harder, accuse deeper. But your silence absorbs it all without bending. They can't access you anymore. That's what composure does. It creates distance without movement. It starves the manipulator. They expected a war, you gave them nothing. And nothing is the one weapon no one can defend against. They trained you to equate composure with coldness. They said calm meant apathy, that stillness meant disconnection. They told you that expressing everything was healing, that silence meant suppression. But you learned that not every emotion deserves an audience. You realized that composure is not indifference, it's clarity. It's the point where emotion meets intelligence. You stopped explaining your piece to people who thrive on problems. That made them nervous because they could no longer label you. When you were emotional, they called you dramatic. When you grew calm, they called you detached. But you understood what was happening. They couldn't control what they couldn't define. Your piece confused their vocabulary. You became a mirror they couldn't interpret. Composure became your rebellion because it dismantled the script of predictable suffering they wrote for you. You stopped performing pain and became precision, and precision terrifies those who survive through noise. They were never prepared for evolution. They were ready to handle the old you, the one who defended, justified, begged to be seen. But evolution doesn't announce itself. It walks in quietly, wearing patience like armor. You began responding differently to the same provocations. You didn't argue, you analyzed. You didn't chase closure, you created it internally. That shift threw them into panic because their tactics stopped working. They expected emotion, not awareness. They tried to play the same game, but you changed the rules mid-match. You no longer sought peace through explanation. You realized explanation is just a leash disguised as fairness. You didn't owe them understanding, you owed yourself peace. That realization killed their illusion of superiority. They were never fighting you, they were fighting control over you. The moment you stopped reacting, the game ended. And what haunts them most is that you didn't even celebrate the victory. They once believed they knew how to disarm you. They memorized your vulnerabilities, your patterns, your emotional reactions. But healing rewrote your blueprint. You no longer flinched at the same triggers. You no longer sought validation from the same sources. They didn't know that pain teaches composure better than comfort ever could. You learned that stillness doesn't mean indifference. It means endurance. They threw their usual words, their emotional traps, their half apologies, and you watched them fall flat. Their manipulation only works on those who need to be understood. You no longer needed that. You became fluent in detachment, in waiting, in letting things reveal themselves. They can't manipulate someone who no longer needs closure. They thought you'd come back pleading, explaining, reacting. Instead, you came back with silence. That silence spoke louder than their arguments ever could. It said, "You no longer hold power here." Composure changes the energy of every room you enter. You don't even have to speak. People feel it, the weight of control, the presence of awareness. They look at you differently now. They hesitate before speaking because your calm makes them hear themselves. That's the psychological effect of composure. It forces people to confront their chaos. They can't distract you with volume. They can't guilt you into reaction. They're exposed under the weight of their own noise. You've become what they feared, someone immune to emotional manipulation. And they can't attack immunity. They can only withdraw. They leave not because you pushed them, but because your stillness denies them oxygen. You didn't destroy them. You made them irrelevant. And irrelevance to the manipulative is worse than defeat. You mastered control not by overpowering others, but by mastering yourself. That is composure, the art of unlearning reaction. They'll tell others you've changed, that you've grown cold or distant. But that's just how peace looks to the unhealed. They were used to chaos. They were used to you breaking down to make them feel powerful. When you stopped giving them that performance, they called it pride. They can't process someone who's no longer emotionally accessible. They confuse peace with arrogance because they only understand connection through suffering. You stopped being relatable the moment you started being regulated. They say you built walls, but what you really built were boundaries. You stopped explaining why you chose quiet. You learned that true composure doesn't need to prove itself. Those who get it feel it, those who don't react to it. Either way, you win. Because calm doesn't need defense, it just needs endurance. You gave them a new experience, an opponent they can't provoke, a mind they can't invade. They are most dangerous when they think you're fragile, and most powerless when they realize you're calm. Composure is the great equalizer. It doesn't shout, doesn't justify. It simply exists. You learn to let them collapse under the weight of their own projections. They wanted to fight your pain, to feed on your reaction, to make your suffering their stage. But you took the stage away by refusing to perform. That's what composure does. It steals attention from chaos and gives it back to truth. You didn't match their energy. You raised your frequency. You made peace your shield.